The best and worst case scenarios for this weekend's fight card, UFC Fight Night Cejudo versus Song. We're going to go through this entire UFC Fight Night and kind of figure out what's going to be the best case scenario for this entire card, because there's some bad things that can happen, all decisions on the card, every prospect losing and things like that. Cejudo winning, because do we really want him getting another title shot in the bantamweight division and becoming the cringe UFC bantamweight champion again? No, we don't. So we're going to figure out what is the best case scenario on this card. We're going to get it started with the first fight of the card, make our way to the main event. Of course, if you do want to see the bets I am making for this UFC Fight Night, check that pinned comment down below or go down to the description of this video. But without further ado, best case scenario for Modestas Bukauskas, Rafael Cerqueira. Has to be Modestas winning. He's from Lithuania, which doesn't really have a lot of, UFC fighters. I think Bukauskas is really the only fighter from Lithuania. Rose Namajunas is kind of the other that's sort of from Lithuania, represents the United States, but has some ties to Lithuania. So I definitely would assume the UFC, the fans and everything would want Modestas to win. He is younger. He is from Lithuania, and, he's kind of the better fighter here. And when you got the younger guy, when you got the guy representing and kind of carrying a country on his back, best case scenario is, of course, for him to go out there and get a nice knockout win over Rafael Cerqueira. Rafael doesn't really have a crazy amount going for him. He's a Brazilian. There's plenty of Brazilians inside of the UFC, so he's already lost in the UFC. It's not going to do too much harm if Rafael goes out there and loses. So best case scenario, Modestas round 1, round 2. Knockout. Eric McConico taking on Nursultan Ruziboev, 34-year-old stepping in on short notice. This is an easy one. This is not one I have to think about very hard. Nursultan winning is obviously the best case scenario here. He is taller, lengthier, in his prime, 31 years old, 2-0 in the middleweight division. Bruno Ferreira knockout, Dumas knockout, and only lost to Buckley. He's actually a surprisingly big name, millions of followers on Instagram, representing the country of Uzbekistan. I mean, it's a no-brainer here that Nursultan winning is the best case scenario, because obviously for his country and for the division as well. He's an experienced fighter and still 31 years of age, freakishly tall when he goes back to welterweight, very, very huge for the weight class. So a lot of things going for Nursultan, not much going for Eric. Best case scenario, Nursultan knocks out Eric McConico in round 1, in round 2. Worst case scenario, Eric wins a split decision. But we go on to welterweight, Nikolay Vertino and Austin Vanderford. This is an interesting one because we have a country in Kazakhstan here for Nikolay Vertino that, the UFC, I feel, want to invest in a little bit in the future. Once Shavkat Rakhmonov becomes champion, I'm assuming the UFC wants to bring in more Kazakh fighters. But Nikolay's not really that guy. I don't feel like they could build Nikolay into a Kazakhstan star in the UFC. He's 35 years old. He's a little bit taller here, a little bit lengthier. He is the favorite to win, but I think the best case scenario is really to have Austin Vanderford winning. He's actually a bigger name in the UFC, has the tie to Paige Van Zandt and things like that. So best case scenario here is an Austin Vanderford submission win against Nikolay Vertino. Worst case scenario, a Nikolay decision. So I would assume they want Austin to win in this fight. Unless you're a Kazakhstan fighter, probably rooting for Austin in this case. Unless you hate Paige Van Zandt or something like that. Then we go on to bantamweight, Javid versus Ricky. This is simple. We got the younger fighter representing his country on literally just him and his brother representing Afghanistan at the moment, fighting out of England as well. So you could also put him on a UK card, which the UK fighters have a lot inside of the UFC, but this is another good addition to the UK roster as well. Ricky Simon, 3-fight losing streak, representing Vancouver, Washington. Not a huge market, I would say. There are some other Washington fighters on the roster. There's only 2 Afghanistan fighters on the roster. Again, London he's also representing. He's young, he's tall, he's lengthy, he's experienced. Have to be assuming that they're going to be rooting for Javid. Ricky's a hard guy to finish. Mario Batista, Vinicius Oliveira couldn't finish him, so I'm assuming the UFC have to be rooting for Javid to go out there and finish Ricky Simon. Do what a lot of people can't do and get the finish. Ricky's a guy that has beaten Merab Dvalishvili. This is a new marketplace in Afghanistan they could kind of tap into a little bit with the 2 fighters they do have. And again, they could put him on a London card if need be. So yeah, best case scenario, Javid by finish. Mansour versus Nick Klein, two Americans here in the UFC middleweight division, representing, again, Wisconsin and Columbia, Maryland. I have to be rooting for Abdul-Malik to win this fight. It's, of course, best case scenario, Mansour goes out there and he gets a knockout in round number 1. He's a big up-and-comer in the middleweight division, fighting at an MMA Masters with Eric Nixick as well. Training with a lot of other good middleweights there. Again, undefeated, young, 27 years old, tall, 6'2", and 80-inch reach as well. So he's a very good prospect here. And to lose this early on to Nick Klein, who personally I don't think is really UFC caliber at the moment, I would say Mansour Abdul-Malik is obviously going to be the best case scenario, knockout round 1. Worst case scenario, again, Nick Klein to win the fight by a decision. We shall see, though. We shall see. Then we go on to Andre Fili, Costa. This is interesting. Because Andre Fili's a big name. Andre Fili is a big name, but he's 34 years old. Costa, I believe, is 2-2 in the UFC. Beat Shailan Nurdanbiak, who has an even record in the UFC. Beat Austin Lingo, who's not in the UFC anymore. Got knocked out by Steve Garcia. And then lost up a weight class on short notice to Thiago Moises. So it is interesting. I don't think there's necessarily a bad case scenario here for either guy. I think the UFC doesn't really care too much. If Melquizael wins, okay. If Andre Fili wins, all right, we could just probably do another veteran versus veteran matchup again. In the featherweight division, I don't necessarily think there's much to lose or to gain with this matchup, because I don't think Melquizael is going to be a future star, and I don't really think they could build Andre Fili and feed him more prospects in this featherweight division, because he's a hard guy to beat in the featherweight division. So I'm sort of leaning towards best case scenario Fili by knockout, so you can do a veteran versus veteran matchup in the featherweight division after, but again, not much to win or lose in this matchup at all. We got Iwan Cutelaba. This is easy. Come on, guys. Moldova versus Turkey. Turkey and their fans are going crazy over Ibo Aslan. They're all over every comment section regarding Ibo. He is a big name in Turkey and in the UFC now. The casual MMA fan doesn't really know him, but the country is behind this man so much. I can't pull up his Instagram, but I think he has about 1 million followers on Instagram, which is absolutely insane. From Turkey, 28 years old, a finisher. I think no fights go into a decision. It's quite obvious. Best case scenario, we get an Ibo knockout win in round 1 like he's been doing so frequently. So worst case scenario, Iwan Cutelaba plays gatekeeper and is able to get the win here. So Julius Walker, Alonzo Menifield, again, America versus America, so I have to be rooting for, and best case scenario is the younger guy wins. 37 years old. If Alonzo wins, we're just going to have another gatekeeper in the top 15. If Julius Walker wins, we got a 25-year-old, very young fighter inside of the top 15 of the UFC light heavyweight division. He'll be the youngest guy inside of that top 15 behind Yuri Prochazka. Ladies and gentlemen, Yuri Prochazka is the second youngest guy in the UFC light heavyweight division if, and only if, Julius Walker is able to get in there. I'm trying to pull up Google Chrome. There it is. But the youngness, the youthfulness of the UFC light heavyweight division is one of the worst in the UFC, basically kind of tied with the heavyweight division, in that they don't really have anybody inside of 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 years old inside of that UFC light heavyweight or heavyweight division. This is what I wanted to pull up. We got featherweight, lightweights, welterweights, flyweights, and things like that, and just Talison Teixeira. So we need more youth in the higher weight classes. Julius Walker is going to be that youth if he's able to get past Alonzo. So this will be huge for light heavyweight to have a young guy representing inside of that top 15. So, of course, best case scenario here is Julius, who has a 100% finish rate to get inside of that top 15. 100%. Then we got Melsik versus John Silva. This is clear. John Silva is a massive name in the featherweight division. Of course, UFC and the fans overall are going to be rooting for the younger, more powerful, bigger star, bigger name in John Silva to win, so he can fight a Calvin Kattar next, so he can fight an Edson Barboza. He can fight who's another great striker in that UFC featherweight division. I mean, Dan Ige is not too shabby. There's a lot of fun matchups inside of that top 15. Melsik, He's not bad at all. He's not a horrible fighter, but he's very, very, very inconsistent. Doesn't fight often at all. Isn't a real name that you can build. Not a real trash talker. John is a big name. And he is actually fun. He's got personality and things like that. John winning this fight is obviously the best case scenario. Come on, guys. Then we got Rob Font, John Matsumuro. Got to assume on 2 points here. John is probably being paid, as this is his third fight in the UFC. Probably still getting paid like 12 grand to show and win to fight Rob Font here. Might get a little bit of a bump in his pay for stepping in on short notice, but I mean, to get a guy this young, this early in his career, inside of the top 10 or inside of the top 15, and to pay them as little as they possibly can because he's on a early UFC contract. I mean, my gosh. I mean, that is a steal for the UFC to have an undefeated, potentially 17-0 guy take out this veteran Rob Font, go out there and submit him. That's the best case scenario. It's just obvious. UFC's got to be hoping that John goes out there and beats Rob Font and then just learns a lot of English. Wins this fight by submission and just works on that English so he can become a little bit of a star in that bantamweight division, which, let's be honest, I'm going to pull up the UFC rankings for the bantamweight division. I think they only really have Deiveson Figueiredo as the Brazilian representation. I could be wrong. Jose Aldo as well. So Jose Aldo and Deiveson Figueiredo all in their kind of late to mid 30s. So they need that new blood of Brazilian talent to kind of break into this bantamweight division. I think the UFC is definitely going to be looking for John Silva to be that introduction to the top 15. Brendan Allen, Anthony Hernandez, both, I mean, not super old, 29 and 31 years old. Brendan is just, he's not a trash talker. He's not a big name. Not a lot of the fans really like him. A lot of the fans are loving Anthony Hernandez as a star, as an up-and-comer to potentially beat Dricus and beat Hamza Chimaev. It's obvious. It's obvious. He's on a 4-fight finish streak, beating Roman Kopylov and Michel Pereira in his last 2 fights. It's clear. Best case scenario here is Fluffy continues to win and continues to build his name in this middleweight division, and the hardcore fans will just keep rallying behind him. They will just keep rallying behind him. He's in his prime, perfect time for him to enter into that top 10 and take on these Robert Whittaker types, take on the Adesanyas, the Chimaevs, the Dricus du Plessis, the Stricklands, and things like that. So we'll see. Then main event, it's obvious. Again, Yadong Song to win this fight is the best case scenario, and they can send Henry Cejudo back down to the UFC flyweight division. Now, I'm going to talk about the card as a whole. This entire card is a card filled with young fighters. Yadong Song, very, very young, still in his 20s. I think 27 or 27. What did I just say? 27 or 27? He is, 27. Jesus Christ. He is 27 years old. Jean Matsumuro, 25 years old. John Silva, I think, is like 28 years old. Very, very young. Julius Walker, 25 years old. Ibo Aslan, 28. Mansour Abdul-Malik, I think 27 in the UFC middleweight division. Javid is 29, I believe. Nursultan and Modestas are a little bit older. But the kind of whole encompassing thing here for this entire fight card is the UFC has a lot to gain with this fight night in terms of young up-and-coming stars. Yadong Song's learning English. He's learning the trash talk. He's an up-and-coming star. John Matsumuro, 25 years old. If he's able to break in the top 10, he will be a star once he learns his English, once he learns his grammar. John Silva's still 28 years old. He needs to win this fight. That'll be huge for the UFC. Julius Walker, 28 years old or 25 years old for Julius Walker. Ibo Aslan. I mean, these are guys that once they learn English, because of how young they are, they have so much time to develop and keep on getting better, keep on getting finishes, and just become stars in their weight classes and for their countries. For Turkey, for Afghanistan, for London, for Brazil, for China. I mean, we got a lot of things. A lot of upside for the UFC in terms of prospects. So we'll see what happens here. See if the UFC gets a net positive return on this UFC fight night. I do believe they do in the end, because I have Yadong winning. I got Hernandez winning. I don't have John winning, so I don't think they'll get what they're looking for there. But I got John Silva winning. Julius Walker, I think that's a 50-50. I got Ibo winning. I got Mansour winning. Javid winning. Nursultan and Modesta. So a lot of upside on this card. We'll see what happens, but those are the best and worst case scenarios of UFC Fight Night Cejudo versus Song. We'll see what happens. Like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.